Hello and welcome to another Government Technology Virtual Q&A. I'm Zach Patton, the editorial director of the content studio at Government Technology, and today I'm speaking with Keith Bauer, who is the director of data and AI for state and local government at Microsoft. Hi Keith, welcome.
Hey, thanks. Thanks for having me here today. Happy to be here.
Sure. So we hear all the time about AI, artificial intelligence, and how that is really going to transform processes and really drive new outcomes for state and local government. And I know that Microsoft is focused on this whole concept of making your organization AI ready. So let's start there. What does it really mean to be AI ready?
Yeah, we're starting off with a great question there. I think that's the holy grail is to have an answer for something like that. And there's a lot of organizations that have different approaches and different ideas for how to be AI ready. But I would say at a high level, there's four key areas that public sector needs to look at in order to be AI ready. And the first one is making sure that they have an AI strategy. But without a strategy, you're not going to have that direction that points you towards the North Star. The second one is to make sure that you have an AI ready culture. The third is to make sure that you identify all the guiding principles for responsible AI within your organization. And then the fourth is really just getting introduced to the technology. So those are the four high-level principles to be AI ready. If I were to dig into those a little bit and we take a look at AI strategy, there's some pillars underneath creating a strategy that organizations should also consider. And the first is when you're building that strategy is to make sure that they consider all the external factors in the external environment. So what are the current biggest challenges? Are your constituents happy? Are they angry? Are they delighted? And what policies are expected to land? Are there changes coming in government? So taking those external factors into consideration is very important. As well as part of that strategy is making sure that you identify your value proposition of what AI will bring to the organization and to the public. And then the third is really making sure that your organization is aligned for execution. So do you have the right people? Are they skilled? Do they have the right competencies? Do you have the right organizational structure in place? So building out that AI strategy is the key first step. And those are some of the key things that get you started down that path.
Yeah. So then, I think that's all sort of about laying the foundation, right, for AI. Looking ahead a few years down the road, how will AI really be a transformative force for the public sector? How will it help governments, become more efficient and really better serve their constituents?
Well, I've stated this before when I've spoken with customers and at other events, and the potential with AI is only limited by your imagination. So when we look at how AI will transform public sector, we've seen some amazing things take place already. And the future, like I said, it's only limited by your imagination. And so when I look at the big pillars of public sector, and we can take health and human services as an example, we've seen a lot of AI play out over recent years with COVID-19 and the pandemic in terms of where the next hotspot might be, how we can mitigate groups of people. So we've learned about it, we've applied AI, and some of that is kind of well known in AI. But there's other parts, perhaps in health and human sector, that aren't as well known, where you can take AI to another level. And we look at maybe what the future of AI can do to help transform. And an example, I was recently working with a customer, and we were talking about foster care. And we know that in foster care now, that we want to make sure we place kids in the right homes with the right parents. And so a lot of the data and analysis it's focused on that, and for the most part, we do a fairly good job. Where we struggle with foster care is what happens when those children age out and they enter adulthood and they have to go into the workforce. That's where we can really leverage things like AI to transform the future. So I think the latest stat that I heard was by the age of 26, nearly half of children that age out of foster care, nearly half of them have they experience homelessness before the age of 26. And when we look at all of health and human services, it's not just about public health, it's about mental health and behavioral health and homelessness. So we looked at AI to help solve some of those challenges that we have in society today. And another big pillar, if you will, in government where we see AI transforming a lot is in our critical infrastructure space. So if we look at leveraging AI to help solve some of our problems in transportation, in roads, in tollways, in airports, like I said, we're only limited by our imagination in this space. One of the unique things I've seen in transportation is to have the public vehicles equipped with sensors where they can actually detect vibrations in the road to know the severity of potholes, to be able to prioritize where they should be fixed. And this could be done automatically with artificial intelligence. And another interesting stat too is we have about 614,000 bridges in the United States. Nearly half of those bridges are more than half a century old. And I don't know about you, but I'm not a huge fan of really tall bridges that haven't been kept up. And
Right.
but using AI, we have a chance to make sure that all of those bridges are safe, right? If you take the idea of the vision that the vision technologies that we can embed in AI, and then we equip drones with that, and then send out drones to monitor and manage and report back on the bridges that are under repair. So we can just do so much with AI. One last thing I'll point out with AI too is in our public safety and justice space. And I think this is a fantastic use of AI. I don't think it's as pervasive yet as it may one day be. But when it comes to missing children, right, or missing people in general, I recently read an article, and it's fantastic because when you have drones and you have vision technology, if somebody reports that a little girl was last known wearing a pink shirt, normally people would have to be on the lookout for that. And instead, with AI technology, if we were to equip drones and send them up, they could just report back every place that pink is spotted, right?
Hmm.
And then now we have a very refined list and a targeted list that we can go after to find missing people. So just amazing things that are out there, amazing creativity by people that are leveraging AI and investing in AI today. So I can't wait to see what changes are made in public sector and how things transform for the better with artificial intelligence.
Yeah. And it goes back to what you're saying earlier about, it starts with having a strategy and thinking about what those outcomes can be. It does not start with, hey, let's get some AI technology and then think about, where, what we can do with it,
Yes,
right? Yeah.
absolutely.
So as you see, as you look out at state and local governments across the country, what are some of the biggest challenges? I mean, obviously you talked about, needing to have that vision, needing to have that strategy in place, but what are some of the other challenges that they have to confront as they sort of, move forward in this AI journey?
Yeah, so there's two that I see most common across public sector today. One of them we already touched on, and you just commented on yourself. And one of the big challenges, I think people have a fear of missing out on AI. And what happens is they jump into the AI foray with inputs before the outputs. And it seems like a very logical thing to do because you need your inputs to create the outputs. But if you just jump in with the inputs and you're like, hey, we got all this data, let's sprinkle some AI magic dust on it and see what we can come up with. Right? I think a lot of organizations think that that is how AI gets used. Right? AI is cool. We build this machine learning, we apply these algorithms, and we get this great output. And what we find is that they do all those things, but then the output isn't used. It's like, all right, well, who's using this? So then they think they did something wrong, and then they go hire a data scientist or a group of data scientists, or they contract out a data scientist. And the data scientist doesn't have context of that agency or of the department and what they're trying to achieve, and they equally fail. And so one of the biggest challenges is a lot of organizations today put the inputs before the outputs, and they have to flip that thinking, right? They have to really, really focus in on what outputs they want and then make sure they have the right data, the right machine learning, the right people, the right algorithms to get to that output. So it's critical to have that mind shift in really understanding why you are doing something before you just start doing it. I know it seems obvious, but that is one that I see a lot today in talking with customers. And then the second one, where I see a lot of challenges, and this one has a little bit more gravity, is the stakeholder support. So when you look at um, the constituents and their acceptance of public sector use of artificial intelligence, or if it's a business side of government making the case, having IT support, or if it's an IT side making the case, having the business support. So just getting that key stakeholder support is critical for successful AI endeavors. And one of the ways that we've seen organizations achieve that stakeholder support where they want to leverage AI for positive transformation is in making sure that they document and they share and they articulate a path to responsible artificial intelligence, or what we call responsible AI. And there's some pillars under that responsible AI that are very critical to make sure that you get that broad stakeholder support. The first piece of that is fairness. So when you deploy an AI system, build an AI system, making sure that it treats the data and the people that would be impacted by the outcome fairly, making sure that the AI is inclusive, right? It's not just about one type of person that AI should benefit. It's about being inclusive of everybody, all types of abilities, hearing impaired, vision impaired, all races, ethnicities, and genders. So making sure that when you do deploy AI, it is very inclusive of the entire audience that is going to be impacted by that. The third is reliability and safety, making sure that our systems are consistent, they're reliable, they're safe. The fourth being transparency. I don't know about you, but the last thing I like is somebody telling me yes or no for something and not knowing how they came to that conclusion. And that's a lot of what AI does. It processes data, it runs through its algorithms and comes up with a conclusion. And if people don't have visibility into how that decision was made, there's not going to be trust. So having transparency is part of that responsible AI journey, is a key piece of gaining that stakeholder support. The fifth is privacy and security, making sure that we are considerate of the privacy of that information, ensuring everything is secure. And then the last one, overlooked quite a bit, is accountability, making sure that the people that implement these AI systems are accountable, right? We can't just create this and let it go out in the wild. There has to be a person or an organization or somebody ultimately accountable for that AI process.
Yeah, I love framing that as sort of a responsible AI framework. I think that's great. And one of those points that I wanted to drill down on with you a little bit is cybersecurity. I mean, I think it's impossible to have a conversation about emerging innovations, emerging technology without talking about, how governments make sure that stays secure. And how should governments be approaching that to make sure that they're, making the most of these emerging technologies, but also ensuring that they are, protecting constituent information, protecting, their own networks. How do they kind of balance that?
Yeah, so this is a tricky question to navigate, because when I look at cybersecurity and just how fast the bad people keep trying to do more and more and more to damage our systems and impact our privacy and impact our security, I think when we look at cybersecurity and its exponential growth in size, in speed, and sophistication, it is almost impossible for any organization to keep up with that. Right? I think the latest metrics that I read were 20% year-over-year growth in the frequency of attacks in cybersecurity. I think every 32 seconds there's an attempted attack by hackers. And so it is almost impossible for any one organization to stay 100% on top of this, because the way you beat it is to be one step ahead of the attacker. So the speed, the data volume, those are so critical to staying ahead of the bad actors. And we can leverage artificial intelligence to stay ahead of that game. The downside is, for most organizations, is that they don't normally have the scale that some of the larger cloud organizations in the world do. And so if I use Microsoft as an example of how we're able to help in that cybersecurity space with artificial intelligence, it's the sheer scale, right? So we operate and help maintain cybersecurity, leveraging artificial intelligence across 77 countries. I think one of the more recent statistics that I saw is that we monitor 24 trillion security events every single day, and that's managed and monitored by 8,500 security professionals. So that type of scale, and it's still a challenge to stay ahead of the game because of how fast the bad actors in the cybersecurity space keep challenging us. So yeah, it's a huge space. As an organization, we're investing over $20 billion over the next 5 years in cybersecurity, and AI plays a huge piece of that. An example that I give with AI and specifically in cybersecurity is that I believe 61% of the breaches that have happened involve stolen credentials. And one of the biggest ways for the bad actors to get those stolen credentials is through phishing attacks. And if there's a phishing attack or a new attack like that starts over in the Middle East or Asia or here in the U.S., we're able to detect that, fix our systems globally to prevent that from happening somewhere else in the world. So just having that sheer scale of data and volume is really how you stay ahead of the game, and AI is a critical piece of that.
Well, and I think not to be scary, but I think when you talk about the increasing sophistication on the part of the bad actors, I mean, they are using AI and machine learning and these emerging technologies. So I don't know if fighting fire with fire is the right analogy, but they're using these technologies, and I think the only way to as you say stay a step ahead is to also leverage these technologies, right?
100%.
Yeah. So for governments that are ready to get started, around kind of back to what you said at the beginning of kind of developing a strategy and thinking about kind of how the outcomes that they would like to apply AI to, what's your advice for them to get started? I mean, you talked about the importance of gathering stakeholders. Where should they get started here?
Sure. So I'll give you two different answers for this one. One of them, I'll give you the higher level. Here's what any organization can do to get started, and there's three pieces to it. The first one is to embrace a growth mindset. So any organization that wants to pursue the AI path, just be open to learning and constantly learning new things, challenging yourself. So embracing a growth mindset is one piece of it. The second is enabling a data culture. AI is built on the foundation of data. So if your organization is not a data-driven company, a data-driven organization, that needs to be a critical first step, is to make sure that you have a data culture in your organization. And then the third one is defining the AI strategy, right? Starting with that AI strategy and making sure that you know where you're taking your organization. So the three things to get started, or even continue a journey: embrace the growth mindset, ensure you have a data culture, make sure you define your AI strategy. And if we want to get tactical with it, something that organizations can go do today, I would highly encourage that they go online and they do a quick search for AI Business School for Government. We have a full curriculum. It's online. It's free. It's about 10 hours of training just to get you started down the basics. It can help you with that AI strategy. It can help you with creating and defining a responsible AI path forward. So yeah, that would be a very tactical step forward I'd recommend organizations pursue.
Great. Well, that's some very useful stuff for folks to get started and really continue on this journey to AI. So Keith Bauer, thanks so much for sharing those thoughts with us. I really appreciate it. And thanks also to Microsoft for helping make this virtual Q&A possible. And thanks to all of you for joining us. We hope to see you for another Government Technology virtual event again soon.